Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the second segment of our fifth episode, focusing on SEL and its impact on our students. We're going to turn to Maria and ATIBA in a few seconds to continue the conversation with Jon Eyler. But before we do that, I want to remind you all that if you do like what you hear tonight and want to learn more about various topics centered around education, feel free to subscribe below or tune in next week at 7 p.m. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy.
You know, Jon, you left us with this notion of, you know, what ATIBA had asked, you know, what are you seeing out in the community, not just our students, but also with their families. And so, you know, I'm wondering, what kinds of trends are you seeing across districts with kids? And is there anything that's just kind of standing out that was most surprising?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have tons of ideas running through my mind right now. So one, I think that comes to mind immediately is, you know, a general trend when we talk SEL is to run to a curriculum as a solution for this. And so when you ask the question to many district leaders, hey, what is your strategy for addressing social emotional competencies? Oh, we just purchased, you know, Second Step, or we're gonna, you know, bring in Y-Try, or we do character counts, or something along those lines. It's an immediate like curriculum. And I think one of the challenges, there's a lot of really good curriculum there to utilize. I think one of the challenges is oftentimes these are things that are layered onto a system. They're not necessarily woven into the fabric of the way that you do school. And so what happens is, you know, SEL becomes this additional set aside vertical piece that it's like, okay, we got to find time for the SEL lesson. And, you know, where does that fit on my schedule or my master schedule? It doesn't, right? And so what gives if we're going to do SEL, and what's more important now? So I think those are some of the structural changes I see in education. Another trend is, you know, when you talk SEL, it's really kid focused and it's oftentimes deficit oriented. So I've got 5 kids who have SEL issues and they need to get like SEL help, right? And so they must need to go to an SEL specialist or a counselor or someone to get them SEL'd up. Right?
It's not coming from me. I can't help them. Yeah.
No, but I think that's just the thinking of like, I do, you know, English or math or, you know, whatever my content expert, and then you do like SEL over there. And I think it's a big miss really in terms of integrating. And so that would be another trend, is that we're kind of siloing these efforts, if you will. Another trend, I think, is that SEL is oftentimes associated with behavior and behavioral outcomes. So if kids have, you know, behaviors A, B, and C, then that leads to a need for social emotional competencies. We're not really, I think, as a system, and this is an overgeneralization, we're not really seeing social emotional competencies as a foundational set of skills that provide academic outputs, right? And so we have this miss in terms of, you know, close reading strategies, for example. Let's unpack that from a social emotional competency perspective. What are the skills that kids need to be able to engage in close reading strategies? Close reading is a metacognitive tools kit, right? I mean, it's like, it's thinking about your thinking as you're reading. It's interacting with the author as you're reading. It's pulling out questions and making connections to, you know, our past experiences. Those are some pretty complex thinking skills that are not often always developed academically. Those are developed socially in many cases, right? And so when we look at this massive shift in just society in general, you know, a lot of what we're dealing with now is we don't have a whole lot of face-to-face interactions where kids are learning these things implicitly. And it's no fault of, I mean, we have people who are working multiple jobs, we're in a virtual space like this. And so the opportunity to learn a lot of these isn't there like it was 20 years ago. And so we don't have the benefit of kids having some of these implicitly developed, and so we've got to explicitly develop that. And I think there's a miss in terms of the connection between social emotional competencies and academic outputs. It's not SEL behavior, you know, and academics over here. It's absolutely necessary to teach those socially so that they can be used in an academic output. So I think those are some major pieces, major trends. I mentioned the other one earlier with just a focus on kids only, not kids and adults. And so I think, you know, if we're looking at social emotional competencies, there might even be a parallel adult strategy within the system of how do we give feedback to adults around social emotional competencies. Wow, what does that look like in education, right? I think those are some opportunities in this space.
Yeah, you reminded me of something, and that is, we've had conversations of the work that was being done out in Puerto Rico while I was out there, and you got to see firsthand. You actually came out and took a look-see. And one of the things that we found, which was a surprising probably, was the fact that even when we started to give our teachers tools and we wanted them to be able to utilize with kids, we found that they were the ones that were working through their stuff just from using the tools in preparation to use with kids because of the trauma. It doesn't just, we're so busy caring about everybody else that we fail to recognize, like you said, that has to start with your own experiences and your own biases. I mean, you have to confront all that stuff, so it can get, it is a process for sure. ATIBA?
Yes, one of the things you said, John, that kind of struck me, reminds me of the old days when kids with special needs, special ed kids were placed in a branch or wing of the school separated from everyone else. And what you mentioned earlier there kind of raises some concern that if we aren't careful and if the people in the buildings aren't properly equipped and their perspective isn't correct, we can treat SEL as if it is the way special ed used to be treated in the old days, as opposed to everything being integrated. So now, ATIBA, it's time for you to go and get your SEL remedies, if you will. And then you come back to math, science, social studies, and so forth. So that raises some concerns. And I just want to get your take on that. And at the same time, there's a question here from Hector Montenegro. How best to implement SEL virtually? And do you have some concrete examples that you can share?
Yeah, it's two great areas. Let me address yours first, and then Hector, I'll take a stab at it. I don't know that I have a good answer because I think we're all trying to figure this out in terms of this virtual world. I think with the SEL piece, it could be another track. It could be another siloed intervention, if you will. And so I guess if there's one word that I would kind of push in all of these other areas, whether it's restorative practices, positive behavior intervention support, social emotional learning, academic instructional strategies, if you will, it's the one word is integration. That we don't learn these in silos. We don't teach them in silos. We've got to really force this way of thinking about these from an integrated perspective. So I'll use one example, restorative practices. When I say that word, people tend to run to discipline and things that have occurred on a campus that we need to be repaired, right? So it's like we need to do this huge restorative conference. A huge major foundational part of restorative practices is sense of belonging to a community and relationships. That's all classroom, level 1, tier 1. That's all instruction, right? You can build community. You can use instructional strategy. You can use a circle strategy. I see Brian Menneber on here from Kern. They're doing a great job of integrating this work, but you can integrate that into instruction. You can use different content areas. I could do that within math. I can do that in my world history class. That's really what I'm talking. So social emotional competencies, what I'm really hopeful for is being able to look at, for this particular standard, what are some of the parallel social emotional competencies and cognitive skills that would help not only build an outcome here, but build an outcome just in kids in general, whether it's an improved thinking skill, an improved emotional skill, or an interpersonal skill. It's not just about, this particular standard, it's about building skills across the board. But I don't know that we've really married those two worlds yet. We unpack academic standards with academic kind of steps, if you will, or scaffolding. We don't unpack it from what are the foundational cognitive skills, emotional skills, social skills. I think that's where the opportunity is in integration. To Hector's question, how's the best or how best to implement SEL virtually, and share some concrete examples. I don't know the best piece. I can tell you with some of the examples I've seen are not holding back from engaging kids in doing like community circles virtually. We've done this with adults. In fact, when COVID first hit and the shutdowns first started to happen in the last March or so, April, we're like, what do we do? And so we just started opening up these community forums, and it was basically like a town hall, if you will, to our partners. And we just said, come in, we're gonna open this up and have a dialogue around a topic of interest. Just the ability to hear people and to allow them a space to connect, I think was huge. And I think that's just as important for kids in a virtual setting to build social emotional competencies. You can do listening circles virtually. You can use circle structures. We've even tried like fishbowl or like tap in, tap out types of strategies in a virtual setting. It still enables, it creates a platform for people to connect. We can be targeted with the questions that we ask with kids to be able to create vulnerability, if you will, and to share in a different way. So I think those are areas I would say, how can we use a virtual platform and use some of those strategies for core, social emotional competencies built through restorative practices, circles, and engagement opportunities and activities. That's the one that comes to mind, most. I'm not as directly involved right now in schools. I work primarily with leadership teams, so I'm absent kind of more concrete examples to share with you, but that's just one that I've been personally kind of involved with adults.
You got me thinking, Jon. So, when you talk about how the mismatch or the missed opportunity, probably a better way of saying it, of the integration, you can't teach what you don't know. So as leaders, when we host our professional development, whether it's close reading, whether it's whatever the topic is, don't you think then maybe we have an opportunity, particularly right now in this time, in this setting, where we need to take a step back and start marrying the two? Because if we create our professional development, whatever it is, and we are looking at it through that lens of integration of social emotional learning with whatever that PD is, then now we're at least utilizing that platform so that people, adults, can start to really reap the benefits of what that looks like. So then that way, when they create their planning, when they start unpacking those standards, if you will, they now have some point of reference.
Yeah, it's a great, I think, opportunity. I look at what structures do we have in place to create that integration. So, when you talk specifically, what would it look like if we put our instructional coaches or experts around curriculum instruction, and we took our social workers and put them in the same room to unpack standards together? Like, what would that look like, right? To be able to do that analysis of identifying author's intent. Okay, so what are the social emotional competencies? It's perspective taking. It's me thinking about what you're thinking about me right now. Okay, who carries that expertise from a social emotional behavioral? It's your school psychologist, it's your social workers, it's your counselors, right? Who carries the content expertise in terms of unpacking standards? It's your instruction folks, your teachers. They operate in different worlds, right? It's, oh, you need SEL, we're going to send you over there. So I think that's one structurally. How can you pull these teams together? I think the other is, MTSS is a big multi-tiered system of support, is a big kind of framework, if you will, that like SEL is getting a lot of attention right now, a lot of traction. And again, like SEL is kind of vertically implemented. I use an example of my daughter just to kind of explain this and give a real concrete example of this. But, a tier 2 teaming structure. When I say tier 2, I'm looking at kids who are not responding to your basic core of instruction, whatever that looks like, whether it's social, emotionally focused or instructionally or both, right? It's kids who are just not responding, need something more. And, a PBIS type of a system under an MTSS umbrella is going to look at a student, do problem solving that's more behaviorally oriented. An RTI system, response to intervention, is going to look at more academically oriented systems. Right? There isn't a structure that really looks at this together. And I use my daughter as an example. Struggles with anxiety, has for many, many years, general anxiety. And when she was younger, it showed up 2 different ways for her. Academically, it showed up as a fluency challenge where She would read a word, she would come to not understand what it was or not know, and she would just get stuck in this rut. It's like the record keeps playing, right? And it's, do I need to know this? Am I going to be tested on it? Well, do I go on? What if I don't know? And it's just like stuck, right? So the fluency piece was really a challenge for her. On the behavioral side, she's a competitive swimmer, and she would not swim the backstroke. And part of that was, you know, you don't see the bottom of the pool. You can't see anything but the sky when you swim the backstroke. And you have to use this row of flags to do a stroke count to know when to turn and turn off the wall. And if your stroke count is off, you hit your head, it's a concussion, right? So what's happening as she does the backstroke is my count's gonna be off. I'm not gonna hit it. I'm gonna get a concussion. Again, it's like being in the rut.
Yeah.
If she was in our traditional system, if you will, education, a behavior team would do a behavioral response for her to address the swimming piece of not wanting to swim the backstroke. An academic team is going to do the fluency piece. Neither one of those are addressing the cognitive issue,
Yes.
being able to get unstuck, regardless of whether that's academic or behavioral. And so I think in a multi-tiered system of support teaming structure, one tier 2 team that allows to look at some of these underlying foundational thinking skills, cognitive skills, emotional skills, allows us to address the core that shows up for kids in 2 different areas.
That's an awesome, awesome example. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's going to tee us up, because now we're going to take a break and we'll come back and talk a little bit more with Jon Eyler.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.